Hi everyone! Welcome to this Sarabande House of Bandits takeover with me, Charlotte Garnett, the anti-anxiety jeweller. Today I'm going to be taking the opportunity to talk a little bit about mental health, how we're coping during the lockdown, and how my jewellery might be able to help you. Mental health is a really personal topic for me. Having struggled with depression, anxiety and an eating disorder for the majority of my life, it's something that's always been inescapable. Art should mean something is something that I've always lived by. It's why I've always been drawn to it. To me, it's the media that you can put the most of your heart and soul, your rawness into, and really connect with other people on that level. Seeing a painting even from 100 years ago and being able to identify that feeling, that always drew me in. However, I'd never really found a way to make my experiences mean anything other than just portraying them in their rawness. It wasn't until I really thought about putting together the functionality of how I can help myself, how I have been helped, into that jewellery, combining the desire to own something beautiful and the pride that comes with the functionality, that I really found my meaning and my calling as a designer. Throughout my mental health journey, one of the things I've struggled with most is coping mechanisms. All during the time I was struggling, I had some really negative coping mechanisms, and the only thing I could do was transfer one mechanism onto the other, never really getting to the bottom of why I was doing these things or how I could actually break the cycle of it. It's such an intense compulsion that I think a lot of people can identify with that, even if they're not diagnosed with mental illness. It's something that all people have inside them, that when things get too tough and the limit that you reach has been met, it has to be transferred onto something else. And identifying what things we can transfer them onto in a realistic way instead of an idealistic way is really important. For me, that sort of breakthrough came through when I was in my third year at St Martin's, a notoriously stressful environment to be in. I was having a crit with Naomi Filmer, who is my tutor, and I was awestruck of her. I couldn't believe I was having a meeting with her, and I went completely to pieces. I was stuttering, stumbling over my words, absolutely unable to sit still with the shakes. And while I was pitching to her, she was saying to me, "What are you doing? You know, clearly there's something else going on here." And I confessed, I've just been diagnosed with anxiety, I'm not dealing with it well at all, my coping mechanisms are piling up on top of me. And she said, "Why don't you do that?" And suddenly the penny dropped, and it seemed so clear. Of course I should be ploughing all of this emotion into the thing I wanted the most emotion in, which was my work, so that it had sincerity, so that it was genuine, and so that it really meant something to me. As I started making the work, I realised there was a massive other benefit to it, which was that other people were experiencing benefits from it as well. So I'd put my pieces out on the tables during crits, hand them to my friends, and realise actually this was helping them through their crits as well. It was helping them through the stressful periods of their lives, and soon I started loaning them out, seeing what people would really associate with, what did work for people and what didn't. After that, I had to figure out why they were working. So how does it work? My jewellery is based around the principles of stimming, mindfulness and grounding. So first I'll start by describing stimming. It's a behaviour that most of us will recognise when we think about disorders like autism. So perhaps it might be expressed in things like repetitive hand actions. That could be things like repetitive slapping and clapping, anything that revolves around a repeated use of your hands. My favourite example, and one you'll probably have heard me talk about before if you've ever seen any of my other interviews, is Les Tricoteuses. This story comes from Renaissance France, where ladies of the High Court were required to come and witness beheadings. So in write-ups about these scenarios from historians, everyone passed their behaviours off as really stereotypically French and blasé because they would knit while they were watching beheadings. When we go back and look at things like Bob Hirschen's analysis of this, we can see that actually these women weren't knitting because they were blasé about what they were watching. The only reason they could keep a straight face while witnessing such horrific acts was because they had a manual action that they were blocking their trauma with, and that is stimming, a repetitive manual action that blocks excess stimulus. When things are too much, our hands have a way of rerouting the way that we think, and that can avoid things like associating a certain emotion with a traumatic memory, and actually reprograms the way that we store these memories. It also changes the way that we think about these memories later on. So subconsciously, our body has given us a way to rethink things without us even noticing, so that we're not constantly experiencing emotional trauma, and we're not constantly becoming overstimulated in a world that has so much stimulus anyway. The next point is mindfulness. Mindfulness is a bit of a buzzword these days, but it is nonetheless really important in discussions around mental health. It's something that we're all taught about when we go along our therapy journey at one point or another, but isn't often explained in a way that's accessible to many people. Essentially, the practice of mindfulness comes down to thinking mindfully about what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Taking the small pleasures from things, noticing how soft your jumper is, noticing how much you like your coffee, noticing how crunchy that snack is, just enjoying the small things around you. And in itself, that practice helps you bring your mind back to the present instead of living in the past or worrying about the future, and allows you to be able to progress from step to step during your day. The last step I'm going to talk about today is grounding. Grounding is the principle of how my work facilitates stimming. Grounding is bringing your mind back down to one point. This is super important when we're thinking about things like panic attacks and catastrophic thoughts. So that's when one small thing, one small trigger in our day-to-day life can spiral out of control, bigger and bigger, to the point where we can't focus, we can't do things in a linear fashion, whether that be work or just getting about with your day-to-day. So grounding, the principle of that, brings you back to one point. The practice of it is much harder than that. Something that therapists often suggest, and a thing that a lot of people are familiar with, is the elastic band theory. Putting an elastic band around your wrist and then snapping it to bring yourself back to that pain moment on your wrist, and is often suggested as a way for self-harmers to improve their behaviours. However, this isn't very ergonomic, it's not designed for that, and it's often not something that people naturally go to. What my work does is it provides that go-to. It provides something that is ergonomically designed, that is just there in the moment when you need it. Something you might have noticed already during this talk is me going to my necklace here. This point here is a natural position that I often sit in, a protective position. It allows me to feel closed but still engage with someone. It allows me to count my breaths as I'm using the necklace and still be able to focus and communicate. It also gives my hands something to do. Something Bob Herschen said about les tricoteuses, the French women, was that whilst having the knitting was a lifesaver for them, it's not convenient to carry around an emergency knitting kit. What it is convenient to carry around is jewellery, which is why it, to me, is the perfect carrier for these things. Not only is jewellery meant to be something that is super sentimental, it's also highly, highly functional. It's something that you wear without thinking about it, that no one looks twice at in terms of mental health. Jewellery is there to be enjoyed, and with the functionality of grounding, mindfulness and recognising stimming, my jewellery comes together with the desirability. It's something to be proud of. It's something to wear and not be ashamed of your actions and not be ashamed of these behaviours, but to encourage them in a healthy way that helps you get from A to B, carry on with your day and focus your mind in a way that benefits you. Something I'm often asked is helping people to identify how they're already stimming. I think the main thing to think about is that stimming affects everyone. This is not a mentally ill exclusive phenomena. Like I was saying before, this is one of those inbuilt things in everyone that helps us live our day-to-day lives. So whether or not you've noticed a behaviour, there's probably one there. Things to think about are what you're doing when you're not thinking about it currently. Stimming relies on the subconscious. So often it's things like going to your hair, something that's just naturally there in the line of fire when you've got fidgety hands that are overstimulated, when you're trying to concentrate, when a meeting's too much, perhaps you're going for your coat button. Often it's the nails. A really common one is nail biting. All of those things involve a subconscious element where you're doing them without even thinking about it. For me, those subconscious stims started with pulling my eyelashes. It was something that I would do in classes without actually noticing it until I get to the end of the class and realise I didn't have eyelashes on one half of my eye. Not helpful in my day-to-day life. The second thing I started to notice was going for a ring. It was a ring on my thumb. I think everyone's noticed I always wear this ring on my thumb. This is one of my point rings. This idea came from the first ever ring I made. I'd made it really badly. I'd totally oversoldered it and got a huge lump of solder going around the inside. But it was the first ring I ever made, so I carried on wearing it. Soon after that was when my anxiety really came to the forefront of my life and I was really struggling. And I'd often notice that in the places where I was getting overwhelming compulsions to engage with my existing coping mechanisms, I was going to the ring. And the only reason I noticed that was because it was made from copper and was turning my finger green. So I started to notice where it was on my hand. After I lost that ring, I then realised how often I was going to that point on my finger. So one of the things you can do to try and notice your own stims is observe how your hands move. If you're sitting just watching TV, oftentimes people will play with their phone, play with the remote, anything that's in their vicinity. Every time you realise that you have an object in your hand and you're not using it for any particular purpose other than having it in your hand, try and observe the way your fingers want to move. For some people, this is a quick motion. This is something that needs something that can spin, something that's agile and suits dexterous fingers. For other people, that's a stroking action. That's something that has a textural element to it, that you just really enjoy the feeling of that texture for an inexplicable reason. For some people, that is things that initiates the grounding feeling, things with a point on them, things that you can't avoid but touch. Oftentimes people get drawn into touching things that look like they could have some sort of tactile impact on you. Those are the moments where your body is subconsciously going to stim. So try and take notice of what is drawing you to it inexplicably. What is it that you like to go to when you're comforted? So if you have an object at home with you, something that you know you are going to, I invite you now to try and pick that up, and if it's safe to, interact with it whilst we're talking, and that will give you a good feeling of how what you're already doing could relate to the work that I make and how that could benefit you. So when I started my work in my Cure for the Itch graduate collection, I developed 6 different shapes that suited all different kinds of fiddlers. Throughout all of my testing on myself and other people and other sufferers of anxiety, I realised that there were several key things that showed people how they were moving their hands. And I delineated those into each of my pocket pebble shapes. So I'll start by showing you the one that works for me. This is the pinch shape. This one here is a 3-sided shape, and it lets you run your fingers across it. So as I was saying about the rubbing action, this one really suits that option. And for hands like mine that are quite dexterous, but not fast enough to suit something like the Jack's piece, which is with House of Bandits, this piece is the one for you. Then we move on to the textural pieces. This one here is the nubbin. This one was designed based on my best friend Lulu. She's a 2-handed fiddler, which is slightly rarer than being a 1-handed fiddler like me. So this one really encourages 2 hands across it. This one here is made out of pink ivory, and it has a really warm, buttery feeling to it. It's just that sort of material that draws you into it. I get that with both wood and stones. I just can't avoid touching them. I'm a liability in museums. I want to touch all the sculptures. This is facilitating that feeling. So whenever I'm going around a museum, I tend to take one of my wooden pieces with me, and that satisfies that urge to just touch that natural material and feel its natural, comforting abilities. The next piece I'll show you is the spoons. So here I've got the mini shape. This is the one that we've got at House of Bandits. This is a one-handed fiddling person's tool. You can see it really sits into the fingers, and then on the larger size, it fits 2 hands as well. This being the smaller one suits someone perhaps who is using their phone to spin around in their hands, perhaps likes things like acorns, which are suited to the small shape of your finger and can be fiddled with, twirled around and kept in the pocket. The nubbin, handle and spindle pieces really suit someone who uses their whole hand. The bulbous shapes fit nicely into the palm whilst also interacting with your fingertips, and that warm, buttery wood draws in a textural person. Pieces like the spoons, the pinch and the jacks piece suit fingertips. They're someone who likes to move a little bit faster, someone who is always on the go. Often I find that those suit people with issues like ADHD, who are always on the go and have very fast actions when they start panicking, when they need relaxing. The jacks piece is a really interesting piece for me, because whilst as a pocket pebble, it is not the one that works best for me. Being such a clumsy person, I can't do the tricks with it other people can. However, that was the piece that I chose to develop into my wearables collection and inspired the necklace and earrings which I am constantly wearing. This one focuses on your ability to spin it and the actual interaction with something kinetic. Me, like a lot of people, can't get enough of kinetic toys, something that actually moves and interacts back with your body. I also find these pieces really useful for, like I was saying before, counting my breaths, being able to get a hold of time again, being able to focus my mind back down to that one point by doing a small action that I can focus myself on. Particularly the necklace for me, I can't go a day without it. Whenever you see me, this is what I'll be wearing. Then we move on to things like the point ring, which I spoke about before, having that point action on the inside that only you know about. I think this is probably one of my most popular pieces, not only because it's so subtle and so undercover in its appearance, but also because of how intuitive it is to use. I think once it goes on and you realise that point doesn't actually feel like a point until you start interacting with it, that's when people really understand that it is a tool that is there that you activate. It's not ever present, you're not constantly being brought back to that point, but when you need it, it's there for you and you can push in and bring your mind straight back to that point. Anytime, any day, no one's going to notice. So that leads me to where I am now, showing for the first time with House of Bandits my new Pinnacle collection, and that features pieces like this cusp ring here. You can see I've taken the principle of the point ring and totally inverted it with these pieces. That decision was really informed by wearing my wearables collection myself, and in pieces like my signet ring here, where the main visual element is in the seal. So I've taken things that remind me visually of being comforted. So in this one here, I've got a paint palette, which already gives me that emotion being evoked from the memory of seeing my paint palette, of being comforted and happy. But then the textural element of this piece is in the back, where it comes down to a tip here, and I found that my natural instinct was that my thumb pad was going to that on the back. So I took that element and ran with it in this new collection, with differing levels of extremity throughout the collection, where the pieces are sculptural and lead your fingers across the undulating curves, along the knife edge texture, down to the tips of sharpness, where they don't only catch the eye, they also really catching your attention. 1 in 4 people in the UK will experience mental illness on any given year, and with lockdown those numbers are only rising. So what can we do to help ourselves and our community? The best place to start is talking. That's why I enjoy hosting talks like these. Bolstering our community, building our relationships and realising that you're just not alone is the best thing for us, moving forward in destigmatising mental health, getting everyone on board with the need to look after it and preventing crises before they happen. The next best thing to do is focusing on overstimulation. As our saying is, the cause of stimming behaviour is overstimulation. What we can do to cut that down in our day-to-day lives is focus on the triggers. What is it that is actually causing us to become overstimulated? For a lot of us, especially those with anxiety, overstimulation is ever present anyway. So flooding ourselves with information whilst we're trapped in at home isn't helping. Sometimes identifying your own boundaries, especially with things like social media, are really important. I think, as a lot of us have seen, especially with the recent election, checking our phones every 2 minutes to check if we're free again isn't actually helping our overall mental health. So setting up a boundary and realising where you are pushing your mind too far and giving yourself a break. There's a difference between being informed and simply oversaturated. The next thing you can do is be present. And this goes back to mindfulness, living in the present. Being trapped at home, it's easy to get into a cycle of catastrophic thinking, worrying about the future, worrying about what is going to happen. Whilst that is a natural temptation, that's not beneficial in our own lives on a day-to-day basis. So practicing mindfulness, whether that be tactilely through the things that we're using, like our jewellery, or whether that be mentally, thinking about what we can do in the present moment, what we can enjoy in the present moment, and how to keep going on a day-to-day basis. The main thing I want to achieve with my work is destigmatizing mental illness and providing people with something they can actually be proud of, something you can take in your day-to-day life and feel strong and confident wearing, knowing that you're making better choices for yourself. The thing I love about the mental illness community is how strong we are, and that once you've started engaging, it really gives you a sense of the fact that you are not alone, and it's not a bad thing. Being mentally ill means that you can have connections with people you've never met before without having to explain what you've been through, because we get it and we've been there. And not only that, but mental illness can also create non-neurotypical ways of thinking, ways that other people may never have thought about, that lead to an outlet that's better for all of us. So the last thing I want to impart is you're not alone. And if you feel like you need to talk out, don't hesitate in getting in touch. I'm always free to DM on Instagram. My handle is cgarnett_jewellery, or you can email me at cgarnett@live.co.uk. I really want to thank everyone who's taken the time to send some questions in for me. It's a really nice opportunity for us to interact. So our first one is, how did you come to create jewellery with the specific focus on positivity and well-being? Tell us the story. So, as I was saying before, mental illness is something that I've dealt with for the majority of my life. And for me, the urge to try and put my illness into my work has always been there. I've always used painting as something very autobiographical and very raw and cathartic as a way of expressing how I felt on the inside. But the need to actually do something for myself was really born of my struggle to actually get help. I think it's quite a common story, unfortunately, that a lot of people do struggle to be taken seriously, especially when you're teens, and to actually get to the top of the waiting list. For me personally, it took 4 years to get to the top of an eating disorder waiting list. I hear that has sped up now, thankfully, but in that time I really developed a reliance on my negative coping mechanisms. So by the time I started university and I was into jewellery already, I'd become quite disenfranchised with the amount of support that I could get, the access to it, and the fact that there is a cut-off point. You can get a certain amount of sessions and then you're out into the world and you just have to be able to cope. So I'd already been working in painting and drawing beforehand in 2D arts, just as a cathartic way to get my emotions out and work autobiographically. It also gave me a chance to reflect on it later on. But I found that it just wasn't cutting it in terms of A, positivity, and B, in a way that actually stayed with me and the viewer. I often think about, like I said before, with the impact, the emotional impact art can have. When you go and see a piece of work, like a Jenny Saville piece, the impact that something that raw and enormous has on you when you're viewing it is huge. But 2 or 3 hours later, when you're looking back on it, the experience isn't quite as impactful as it is when you're there in the moment. Jewellery, on the other hand, being portable, being so interlaced with generational feelings like engagement rings, with signet rings, with things that really have deep meaning embedded into them. They're ever present there for you. You're wearing them all the time. And that became a really obvious way to channel this emotion into. The next part was finding a way to make that positive instead of just cathartic for me. So as I was saying, I then experimented with all these different ways of getting into the psychology and the research, and then developing my own way of expressing that and finding ways that helped me and the people around me. So how did you come to discover the different surfaces that evoke calmness, i.e. marble, wood, and how do these various mouldings of these surfaces assist in the evocation of calmness? So that kind of leads on from what I was saying with my research. I started researching into the different effects that texture and visuals have on us. As I was saying before, a memory has emotion attached to it, and oftentimes, without us noticing, a memory can evoke a certain emotion. So when it's things like marble and wood, that is an emotion of things like childhood, the table that you might have grown up eating at, the sense of luxury in marble, and like I was saying before, wanting to go around the museums, particularly going through the V&A, wanting to touch everything in there. Particularly I found the textiles in marble work absolutely fascinating and tactile. So I really started playing about with the comparisons of that. I already knew I wanted to work in metal, not just for the sense of heaviness and quality you get out of metal, but also the coldness. When you pick up a fresh piece of jewellery that you haven't touched, you can feel that immediate coldness that brings your attention to it. And as it begins to transfer with your body heat, it communicates with your body, which I just love. Putting that next to the wood, which is something really soft and like with this, the pink ivory as well, this is a type of hardwood, as is the ebony. That dense wood has such a soft, buttery texture to it. It really contrasts against the metal. So again, it's about bringing your attention back through the disturbance of continuity with the texture, going from cold to warm, from heavy to light. It also aids in the motion of some of the pieces, which have both in them. Moving on to things like the resin, that was the visual encapsulations, as I was saying. It's something that evokes the sense of happiness. And then moving on to the marble in my newer piece, showing that need to want to touch something when you see it. This actually allows you and invites you to touch it. Which kind of leads on to the next question I've got here, which is, how do you source your various elements in your jewellery? So the marble, for example, when I was in my last studio, I was working above a luxury kitchens manufacturer, and going past every day, seeing their skip full of huge, beautiful pieces of marble, once I touched that, I knew I want to work with this somehow. So I managed to talk to them and communicate a deal where I could use their pieces that were otherwise going into the tip. So that's a real win-win to be able to produce it ethically and sustainably, and be able to use really gorgeous, high-quality materials. And again, with the woodworking, all of the precious woods that I use, I found a company where I can buy their offcuts. So it's pieces that would be otherwise thrown away from the furniture industry and other luxury industries that work perfectly for jewellery. Metal-wise as well, we're lucky enough that in the UK the majority of our metal is 100% recycled just within the industry, so the chances are when you're commissioning a piece it's already going to be 100% recycled regardless of your designer. I particularly choose to work with people that are independent businesses in London, and I know work with these recycled metals as well, so it brings an added level of satisfaction as a maker to be able to be making them sustainably. Next question, I really like this one. If your jewellery could speak, what would it communicate to the wearer? I think this is probably the most important part of my work, and it is the message it's imparting is be proud of yourself and know that you can get through this moment. And if you can get through this moment, you can get through this day. I want to impart that feeling of an arm around the shoulder and that encouragement to let you know you got this. And I think that's something that resonates with people, whether you're diagnosed as mentally ill or not. Everyone needs an arm around their shoulder at some point, and a bit of encouragement and normalization to know this is okay, you can get through this, and this too will pass. So my next one here is, what other materials and surfaces have you found that evoke calmness, and do you plan to incorporate them into your jewellery? So I think the next material obviously that I've been looking at is stone, and looking at how I can incorporate gemstones into that as well. I'm not a big fan of using gemstones solely as adornment. Of course they're very beautiful, but I've seen far too many designs, especially in the luxury industry, where you have a gorgeous great big stone that is just whacked on a band for the sake of value. That's not the way I like to work. I really like to respect the materials and do them justice, and not just because of their value. Like with using offcuts, they are nonetheless stunning pieces of material to interact with, regardless of their actual monetary value. So a diamond can be absolutely stunning, but just because of its value doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to use it. However, I've been looking into using rough stones and uncut stones, which actually have a textural element in themselves. And not just that, but looking into the play of metal textures, going back to how you can actually impart texture into the metal itself to give a certain sensation. Something that's inspired me recently was an expedition I was lucky enough to take to Antarctica with the eco company Hurtigruten, where you go out with scientists, you help fund their research, and at the same time you get to learn and experience an amazing environment. And in the ice fields there, you get to see the icebergs relatively up close. And the diversity of texture is unlike anything I've ever seen before. It is just incredible. Often caused by natural bubbles, by breakage, so you get real linear textures, real sharpness that can be right next to something completely contrasting, big pillowy landscapes that look like clouds. So I've been playing with different surfaces like that next to each other in terms of actual physical texture, and even the play between high polish, which is something I love doing for that buttery softness, next to matte finishes and that different satiny feel. Again, like with the difference between the metal and the wood, that subtle contrast that helps gain your attention in a subtle way. Also as well, if anyone's ever interested in incorporating their own ideas of what a textural comfort might be, I'm more than happy to start experimenting with things like that. I find that that's one of the most interesting parts of doing bespoke design. So, if you could create jewellery that offers an alternative feeling, what sort of feeling would you like to invite, and can you picture the form of the jewellery? Really interesting concept there. I think that another feeling I'd like to evoke is the feeling of a hug, another type of physical comfort that just makes you smile. And again, something that isn't delineated between mental illness and non-mental ill. It's something that I believe is a spectrum anyway. Everyone needs a hug every now and then, and I think it's one of the most beautiful experiences you can have in a tactile, physical way. So thinking about things that would feel embracing and safe. I think safe is a really key word for me in that context. Next one, you create signet rings that incorporate crushed elements such as gold leaf and ash. Can you tell us how these pieces work with inviting wellness and positivity? Do they hold symbolic meaning? So, yes, the main one that I have worn in the past is the ash and gold leaf piece. As a smoker, having ash around me is something that visually indicates to me that I have comforted myself. And whilst I have worked on several negative coping mechanisms as the visual comfort, I've also done things like my paint palette ring, which is a sort of neutral, positive coping mechanism that I have, and that I know when I look at this and think of my paint palette, that gives me the sense of having just painted and having just comforted myself. So there is theory around visual emotion, as I was saying before, memory, encoding your emotions, and visual memory is one of the things that plays into that. So I always encourage people to think about what visuals actually bring them happiness, and it can be anything from physical objects, a favourite colour. I've done one that was simply the sea, the feeling of looking at the sea. Yeah, symbolism in itself, if that is what holds that feeling of comfort to you and feeling like you have just comforted yourself, then that's what you should go for. But really, sky's the limit with what you can put in there. And finally, we've got, what advice would you offer to those feeling anxious at home, especially in relation to the current climate when working from home and on and off lockdown, and physical isolation for many has become the norm? So I think that's a really important question to be asking, especially in this context. Obviously, this is something that I personally am also struggling with right now. So I will tell you what I'm going to do to help myself during this time. At the moment, I'm focusing on keeping structure. I think that's something that can really easily slip, especially people who face redundancies as well. Time can start to lose its meaning. So not only am I, with the help of my partner, making lists for myself so that I can identify little things to do throughout the day, I'm also doing that for my week so I can keep control of time passing through the week and the day. I think a main thing to do with that is to not be over ambitious. Put in a range of different things that you could achieve that day. And that goes all the way from completing the email I've been avoiding or completing a complex piece of work, all the way down to just completing the dishes. Sometimes you just have to take the small victories for what they are, because any amount of effort you put into looking after yourself and maintaining your life is important, and you should be congratulating yourself for that. Even if you've only got one thing done a day, that still makes a difference, and that's still important that you did that, and you should be proud of yourself that you managed to do even just that one thing. When you feel like you can't do anything at all, try and incorporate self-care things onto that list. And again, that can be as small as just painting your nails or brushing your teeth. Just getting out of bed can be an accomplishment in itself some days, so make sure you are not being over ambitious with what you're setting yourself and not setting yourself up for failure, and giving yourself smaller tasks to just motivate yourself to keep a bit of structure in your day. Another thing that I've found really useful is obviously practicing mindfulness, but that does ebb and flow with everyone, myself included. It's quite difficult to practice mindfulness on the same level when your emotions are not always on the same level. So something I've done was a 21-day meditation course, and that just helped me be able, I'd sit with my jewellery, because that is what helps me be mindful, of course, and sit with it and practice bringing my mind to a neutral point. And of course, no one can maintain neutrality all the time, but helping yourself get to a neutral point during some portion of the day is really beneficial for the rest of your day. If you feel like you need urgent care, get in touch with your GP right away. There's also some really good charities out there that can help you, like Mind and Sane, a charity I work with my Motley collection. And if you're under 18, there's CAMS. In the meantime, keep an ear to the ground about lockdown. We're hoping to reopen House of Bandits by December, so you can book in, come and talk to me, handle the jewellery in person, and have a great time with us. And as always, be kind to your mind. See you soon.